Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is my privilege and my honor to welcome you all to the 2021-2022 September 11th Memorial Scholarship Program Brown Bag presentations. This program is something that really is meaningful to all of us at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NYMTC. We established this program in 2005 in order to honor 3 of our colleagues who were lost during 9/11 attacks. Jerry Bogatz later in this program will be talking to you about the program itself and how it was started and our lost colleagues. But as I said, it's really a tribute and an honor to Ignatius Adanga, Charles Lesperance, and See Wong Shum, that we honor their memory with research and transportation and technology planning programs with scholarships to deserving students. So you will be hearing today from four students from this year's program talking about the research that they've done for our agencies. And they're really meaningful because the student works with us closely throughout the year, and they come up with a product that really is going to help us move forward. So it really is, like I said, it's my privilege and my honor to welcome you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Bogatz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Deb. As Deb pointed out, this program has existed since 2005. In the aftermath of 9/11, the staff members of NYMTC, along with the member agencies, were trying to find a way to honor the people who were taken from us on that horrible day. And the idea of an ongoing program seemed to be most appropriate, given the fact that it has become, and it was intended as, a living memorial to Ignatius, Charles, and Shum. And it's interesting because as in that function as a living memorial, it brings their names up every year. So they become in people's minds each time we do one of these cycles. And it continues the work that they were involved in. Ignatius, Charles, and Shum were working on regional planning, and they were engaged in that work when they were taken from us. And it's very, very significant that we effectively continue that work through this program. The members agreed with our suggestion of such a living memorial and have funded the program every year since 2005, except for one, I believe. And what Deb pointed out is really significant to the program also, in that the projects that are undertaken by the students are relevant to NYMTC's work. These are not just student assignments that are just work that they're doing, but rather they're doing work that's directly related to the regional planning process, either for NYMTC staff or for a member agency of NYMTC. So it's good for the students, but it's also good for the organization. It extends our ability to look at important issues that we need the capacity to review. And as with any agency these days, resources are always at a premium. So for all these reasons, it's a very important program, and we're always thrilled to get to the end of a cycle in an academic year. One's ending, one's beginning. And I want to congratulate the students for finishing their work, and the last part of that will be their presentations today. We are also honored to have with us today Renee Alexander, who was Charles Lesperance's fiance. And Renee has been part of this program almost from the start, actually from the start, has been an important part of putting this program in place every year. And I guess, Fidel, if we can hear Renee, we'd like to hear some words from her, and then turn it over to Camille to introduce the students. So Renee, all yours. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can't hear you. I'm having some tech problems with WebEx. So if you can hear me, I'm just delighted to be a part of this program again, and the outcomes contribute to the legacy. It is so exciting that we will continue to do this and empower young students to keep learning and growing. and contributing to the memory of your fallen colleagues. So again, thank you for including me, and I'm going to fix this tech problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Sorry that we are having these tech problems. Next up will be Camille Kamga, who is with the University Transportation Research Center, and he'll be introducing our student participants. And Camille, thank you for all the partnership we've had with you for all these years in this program. Camille?
And thank you all. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Renee, for participating in the program. And today, like it was mentioned, we have 4 students. 3 from NYU and 1 from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, who's going to present their project. And thank you with all the agency internship also, because the student work with the faculty advisor and also a member of the agency who hosted the project, the student. So the first student is Fabian Bach. And Fabian is a PhD candidate in sociology of education at New York University. So he obtained his bachelor degree in education study and French from Washington University in St. Louis. He has been a part of multiple research team, which use large data to better understand how work conditions relate to teacher job satisfaction and to explore racial disparity in exclusionary school discipline practices. Fabian's September 11 program internship is with the Regional and Strategy Planning Subdivision Strategy Planning at New York City DOT. He's helped to identify and develop racial equity performance measure. And I won't go further into it, and we're going to have Fabian to present his project.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Camille. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful. So again, my name is Fabian Barch. Thank you all so much for being here. And without further ado, I will be presenting on establishing community context. So a bit of a presentation roadmap. I'm going to start by giving you all some background and by discussing the need for community profiles within New York City DOT. Then I'll talk about the data that got included in them, as well as the selection process for the initial communities that we profile. Then I will transition to talking about the feedback we received from the teams that were able to test out this early proof of concept, as well as some of the data insights that can be gleaned from the community profiles. And then I will wrap up the presentation with a brief conclusion and some personal thoughts as I walk away from this project. So a bit about my internship placement. This year, I was working with the New York City Department of Transportation in their Transportation Planning and Management Division. Specifically, I was working with the Regional and Strategic Planning Unit to develop community profiles. And I'd just like to take a second to shout out to my supervisors, Annie Krasner and Denise Ramirez, without whose mentorship and feedback, these wouldn't be half of what they are. So thank you very much. So what is a community profile? Essentially, it is a fact sheet describing neighborhoods, locales, or sometimes even groups of people. And oftentimes organizations use them as a simplification of the pre-engagement research process. The specific contents of community profiles can vary pretty widely, depending on who put them together, the kinds of insights they wanted to know, and who they envisioned as being the main users. And over on the right, we have an early exemplar that we used as a model for the New York City DOT profiles from the Seattle Neighborhood Profile Initiative. So why does New York City DOT specifically need community profiles? Well, perhaps most obviously, New York City is incredibly diverse. And we see that in terms of racial and ethnic diversity, linguistic and cultural diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and also in terms of the diversity of built environment and infrastructure that different neighborhoods across New York City have. And this is important because neighborhood knowledge within DOT varies by project manager. And the project managers are the people who are responsible for overseeing a project from start to finish. So community profiles were identified as a potential resource that would help compile information into one place and present it in a way that's clear, easy to engage with, and easy to leverage. And the goal with this is to help promote better alignment or to strengthen the alignment between DOT efforts and community needs, and also to foster more effective communication and build trust in government. So after it was determined that community profiles could be a potentially useful resource for DOT, several working group discussions and focus groups were conducted to determine what kind of insights would be most helpful to include. And from those conversations, it was pretty apparent that both quantitative and qualitative insights would be useful to include in these profiles. And some key considerations that people wanted to know as they learned about a neighborhood include demographic information about the people who live there, neighborhood economic insights, DOT travel survey insights specifically about or from residents in those areas, and also opportunities to further deepen knowledge, because even in early conversations, it was apparent that a page or two in a community profile wasn't enough to learn everything about a neighborhood. So the demographic and economic insights we include come predominantly from the US Census, specifically the American Community Survey. And the demographic insights we include are neighborhood race and ethnicity, as well as the percentage of older adults aged 65 plus. We also include the prevalence of people with disabilities, as well as the breakdown by disability type, as well as the most common languages other than English that are spoken within a neighborhood. And these insights are useful because they tell us about potentially vulnerable populations and give us an opportunity to think about potential barriers to participation or potential unmet needs that these groups may have. And this helps us with outreach because we can plan for things like the inclusion of interpreters or selecting locations that are accessible to all community members. Next, we include economic insights, some of which you can see on the right here. They include neighborhood educational attainment, income levels, housing characteristics, and also information on car availability. And this is important because it highlights and contextualizes potential financial barriers to high quality transportation options that may exist. And again, this allows us to be thoughtful in how we plan outreach events. So things like meeting timing could be important for people with non-traditional work schedules, the addition of virtual participation options, or even by adding ways for people to participate on the go. So the next bucket of information included in the profiles comes from DOT travel surveys. Specifically, we include insights from the Survey of People with Disabilities, the Survey of Low Income and Limited English Proficiency New Yorkers, and the Citywide Mobility Survey. And we include the first two surveys because they highlight concerns and needs from groups that are historically marginalized and underserved. And by centering these voices and dedicating so much space to their transportation needs and preferences, we hope to really center them as transportation planners learn about a neighborhood. Additionally, the Citywide Mobility Survey is really useful to include because it gives us good information about broader travel patterns within an area, and also can help contextualize some of the numbers that we see in the first two travel surveys. And the last bucket of information included in the community profiles that I'd like to talk about is the qualitative data and the additional resources. So in each profile, we include a short list of news and blogs focused on local residents, the events happening near them, and their local priorities. So that way, again, we have a more qualitative, richer sense of what's going on in a neighborhood and what matters to a neighborhood's residents. Additionally, we include a short list of DOT-identified community organizations to provide some insight into the community-based, business, and public safety activity going on within a neighborhood. And lastly, we include opportunities to learn more, which includes links to local and citywide street improvement projects, as well as additional data tools, some of which were used to populate the community profiles, and links to other community profiles with slightly different insights on a neighborhood. So now that I've talked through it in pieces, here is an example of one of the early community profiles, and the different informational sections are broken down by the red headers, as you can see. But how can this information be leveraged and made more meaningful? Here, I'd like to give you all an example. And this example focuses on the neighborhood, the Lower East Side. And what we can see is that the median household income for residents in the Lower East Side is significantly below the citywide median income. And we can also see that the poverty rate within this neighborhood is much higher than in the city overall. Additionally, using insights from the travel survey of low income and limited English proficiency New Yorkers, we see that these groups have higher average travel times in this neighborhood than their wealthier English fluent peers. And when a transportation planner sees all of these different insights on a community profile, that can prime them to think about the needs and concerns of low-income residents, and especially the longer travel times. So it could signal the importance of focusing on low-cost transportation options like walking and biking, improvements to network connectivity, or even looking into shared mobility options like City Bike or other bike shares. So after we knew what insights we wanted to include in these profiles, we needed to select the communities that we wanted to profile. And we did this at the neighborhood tabulation area, or NTA level. And we focused very heavily on parts of New York City that were in DOT priority investment areas, as well as neighborhoods that had multiple existing or upcoming street improvement projects. And the goal with this was to make sure that as we developed the community profiles, we could send them out to teams for feedback, and they could use them for projects that they were currently working on or currently planning. We also sought to have a fair distribution across boroughs, and overall, we selected 10 communities, which you can see to the right here, that are heavily concentrated in DOT priority investment areas. So after we designed the community profiles for those neighborhoods and sent them to the teams for feedback, we heard that we're off to a good start. The early users found the community profiles to be informative, and they felt that the information included in them was really relevant. And they also offered some really good insights on how we could strengthen the community profiles moving forward. So the first bit of feedback we got on how we could potentially strengthen the profiles was through the addition of a street map or spatial component. So early users were really, they thought they could benefit from the addition of a spatial component just so that way they could visually confirm on the community profiles that they were looking at the right profile for the right neighborhood of the street improvement project that they were currently working on. Another bit of feedback we got was that early users were curious about the different response options for travel surveys. And we only showed the top 3 most common responses on the community profiles. And people were also curious about opportunities to learn more. So moving forward with the community profiles, we are looking into ways to more seamlessly transition for users between using the community profiles and checking out the resources or opportunities to learn more that are linked in the profile. And lastly, one bit of feedback we got was clarification on what the heat vulnerability index values mean. So we include heat vulnerability index values, which is an attempt to summarize the relative risk of heat-related illness within a neighborhood. And it's also the only composite variable that we included in the early community profiles. And the early users noticed that this measure was the only measure that we included that wasn't really readily apparent in what a 1 versus a 5 or what a 1 versus a 4 meant. So in future versions of the community profiles, we can be mindful about clarifying what composite variables mean, so that way people can interpret them substantively and understand what the information means for New Yorkers on the street. So now transitioning to wrapping up, I'd like to show you all one more data example, this time focusing on the Soundview, Castle Hill, Clawson Point, Harding Park neighborhood, or Bronx NTA 9. And what we can see in this neighborhood is that the prevalence of people with disabilities is significantly higher than the average rate in New York City overall. Additionally, we can see that when asked about their most common modes of transportation, people with disabilities both in this neighborhood and in New York City more broadly use the local bus as their primary mode of transportation. Next, when asked about transportation priorities, people with disabilities in this neighborhood said that improvements to the select bus service was their top transportation priority, and another high-ranking transportation priority was public seating on sidewalks and at bus stops. So using this information or seeing this information, a transportation planner would recognize that any improvements to or interruptions in bus service could be particularly impactful for people with disabilities. Additionally, this gets us thinking about ways that we could change or improve infrastructure to better meet the needs of people with disabilities. So that includes the addition of things like leaning bars or benches at bus stops. Also, the addition of new bus lanes or connections amongst bus lanes, or the continuation of existing DOT programs like the bus stops under the L program, which improves accessibilities for bus stops under elevated subway stops. Now to conclude with some personal reflections. The first is that thoughtful and equitable public engagement work isn't easy, but it is definitely worthwhile and it's definitely worth the effort. It requires deep learning before outreach because we know that communities tend to be most receptive when it's apparent that organizations have put in time and effort to learn about them before asking community members to take their time and share feedback. Also, in being thoughtful, we can reflect on potential barriers to participation that may exist and work to develop solutions so that way everyone's voice can be heard and all New Yorkers can share their feedback. The other main takeaway from the project for me was that data transparency is critical for equity work. And especially in the age of misinformation and fake news, it lends credence to findings when people can follow information from a data source all the way to a finished data product. Additionally, data transparency helps with replicability. So if anyone were to try and recreate the findings in the community profiles or another equity initiative, transparency helps facilitate that. And it also makes it easier to update the data with more recent information or to facilitate the transition if a team member needs to leave an equity initiative. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention. And now we will transition to questions.
Thanks so much, everyone, for participating.
Hi, my name is who's speaking first?
Please, we have one question in the chat, but if you have a verbal question, please state it.
Yes, my name is Carl, New York City, TCC. I think in New York City, the thing I was thinking about was communities in transition. How do we describe a community and try to define it? For example, there are communities in flux, like Long Island City, for example, where you have the largest housing project, but also $1 million condos by the water. Williamsburg, we have Hasidim, and yet you have millennials all in one. Trying to access needs based on that population that happens in New York City in these multiple communities. How does one do that? Does one focus on both entities or groups within that neighborhood? And how do they try to search for giving, necessary needs to those populations through this data? Those are some those are communities that are somewhat different, in other words. How do you do that, or do you just reflect on one neighborhood, or do you simply you put a line to say, we'll not deal with the Queens projects and just deal with the $1 million condos? That's my question, actually.
Yeah, well, so I think your question raises a couple good points. I think the first one is that, again, New York City is incredibly diverse. And, there are going to be neighborhoods within the city where people who are incredibly wealthy are next to people who are living in relative poverty. And I think one way that we sort of address that is by including multiple different insights and by also including insights from specific groups of interest. Another way that the community profiles respond to that concern, especially in terms of changing neighborhood demographics, is that the neighborhood demographic information and the neighborhood economic information both can be updated annually. And because they rely on census data from the ACS, they are fairly reliable data. So as communities change and grow, moving forward, it will be fairly easy to update the profiles and get relevant information about who's living in a neighborhood, as well as getting specific insights from low-income communities or limited English proficiency populations, so that way we can make sure that we're including people who may historically or have traditionally been excluded from the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fidel. We do have one question in the chat, and then we'll keep moving forward. And any other questions people have on upcoming presentations, please put them in the chat. We have one question for you, Fabian. Great work. Can you elaborate on how you decided to define the community boundaries for extracting data from the census blocks?
Yeah, so that was sort of a retroactive decision. We began the process by deciding the frame of analysis that we'd like to use, and we decided on the neighborhood tabulation area level. But to get from census data, which is at census tract level, to the neighborhood tabulation area level, it took a little bit of mathematical work. There is a crosswalk that the New York City DOT produces in order to summarize which neighborhoods are included within a given census tract. And by leveraging that crosswalk, we were able to take the census data and convert it to the neighborhood tabulation area level.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll turn it back to Camille now for the next introduction and speaker. Thank you so much, Fabian. It's fantastic.
Fabian, and thank you very much. Our second student is Christina Consulado. Christina is pursuing a Master of Urban Planning at the NYU Warner School of Public Services. And actually, Christina is a lawyer of public services. Is a lawyer from the Universidad de los Andes, I guess in Bogota, Colombia. And her project is also with New York City Department of Transportation, and the title representation of her project was Coordinated Street Furniture Franchise. Christina, the floor is to you.
Perfect, thank you, Camille. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and happy to present to you the research I was developing during this year. Let me share my screen. I don't know if you're seeing the full screen or just, okay, I guess we're good to go. So, yeah, okay, so as Camille was saying, now I worked through the, in the Department of New York City DOT with the Coordinated Street Furniture Franchise. Before I start, I want to give a very special thanks to the DOT. It was a great year of experiences and learning, especially to Michelle Craven, Carrie Isaac, and Bernice Yala, who helped me throughout this year and guided me on this research. So my presentation will be, I'm going to tell you like the whole work I did during this year. I'm going to explain how the current contracts for the Coordinated Street Furniture Franchise work, the benchmark I did about other street furniture programs around the world, what are the revenue schemes that we could think about developing for the new contract, and the proposals for a new contract that's coming. So basically, what's the current street furniture franchise? So the Coordinated Street Furniture Franchise aims to improve the New York City streetscape at no cost. So there's a lot of newsstands, bus stop shelters that were located in the streets, and New York City wanted to make them look similar and tried not to have lots of expenses while doing it. So they developed a program in which required a third party to install and maintain all the street furniture structures in the city. The contract was for 20 years, started in 2006, and it's going to end in 2026. The contractor is JCDecaux, and the revenue forecasted is $800 million, mainly based on advertising. This revenue is only for the city. So as we're heading to the end of this contract, the DOT is interested in learning what comes next. This is a very big contract. It manages all this furniture in the city, and it gives a lot of revenue to the city. So we need to think what's going next, what we can include, what can we change, what can we do better or keep doing. So what are the street furniture elements that the JCDecaux manages? First, the newsstands that are the ones where you can buy news and other products. they were required to install 330 minimum. They replaced 257, and they installed 127 new sites. For the bus stop shelters, there was a minimum of 3,300 that they had to install. Right now, there's 3,554. They surpassed their minimum, and there's active 3,325. The difference is mainly because some streets are under construction, they've been moved, and those are the differences, but 3,500 installed. There was the automated public toilets, 20 required. There's only 5 installed in the city. And the sheltered bike parking, that there was no minimum agreed. It's very similar to the bus stop shelter, but it's used to park bikes. Installed 20, active 16, same reason as the bus stop shelters, maybe some streets are in construction, so that's why. How does the contract work? The advertising thing is very important to understand, and how why is the private contractor managing these street furniture elements? So basically, the New York City signed the contract with a private contractor that is required to manage the street furniture franchise. How does he do this? The private contractor signs a commercial contract with any companies that are willing to buy advertising. It generates some advertising revenue, right? That the private contractor uses to manage these street furniture franchises. Of course, it gets some revenue for them, but it also pays the New York City for the right of selling those advertising in the city. So basically, the New York City manages the contract, but gives full responsibility to J2DeCo to do all the work. The important part is that the private contractor did all the capital expenditure investments, so DOT had to do none to install all these elements, and the contract included a guaranteed minimum that the private contractor should pay to the city each year. Some of the key takeaways from this contract: the demand for bus stop shelters continues. Everybody wants a bus stop shelter near them. Newsstands don't sell news and publications as they should, and this is a kind of an important point for newsstands, because that's the reason they are in the street. Now they've changed, so the business has changed. This is something that we have to take into account for the new contract. There are only 5 APTs in the whole city, and that doesn't satisfy the need for public restrooms at all in the city. We need to think more about how to satisfy it. The franchise has been delivering many of the goals set in the contract. It's been a good contract. We've seen that they surpassed some of the minimums that they were required. The demand for bike parking has outgrown the program's capacity. So there's other bike parking shelters, racks that have been installed, but not inside of this contract. And we have, as New York City, we have one of the top 5 most valuable advertising markets in the world, which we should take into advantage. So where we are, so basically we have the contract, right? It's finishing in 2026, and we need to think as New York City, what's going to happen afterwards? What's going to happen with the contract? So what we did was, we did research and evaluation. That's all the process I did during this year to review, benchmark, and see what's going on. Then we, with other programs in the world, we had to draft an authorizing resolution that designates DOT as the responsible agency for granting the franchise. This authorizing resolution is very important because the content from this document is going to be the one that is in the request for proposal. We are here. The authorizing resolution has been, there's a first version of this draft that we're still reviewing. I helped to give some input for this document. Then we have to go through the Unified Land Use Review process. This is a process that has to go citywide because there's going to be a bus stop shelter in every part of the city. So all boroughs, community boards, city council have the opportunity to review this document and make some comments. Then we would go to the request for proposals, and then the whole contractual process will go on. So one of the biggest parts of this year was developing the benchmarking because many cities have developed similar contracts to learn, and we need to learn from good practices, what's out there and what we can learn from them, or what we're doing really good and we should keep on doing. We were very interested in the revenue sources because even though advertising is really good revenue source, we should explore some others. what are other street furniture structures that could be included, and the new technologies used to keep on top of technology. So the selection criteria for these programs, while I was researching, was that the program was at least 20 years old, like not surpassed 20 years old, and that we had information available. So the cities that we reviewed were Los Angeles, Seattle, Minneapolis, Toronto, Boston, the MBTA metropolitan area in Boston, Paris, metropolitan area in Paris, Bogota, Brussels, Vancouver, San Francisco, Chicago, Ottawa, London, Pittsburgh, and Berlin. So basically, most of them are U.S. programs, but there are some experiences abroad. What we did was review what type of street furniture elements they were included in their RFP. So these are all the elements that we found were in any of these programs: bus shelters, bike racks, news racks, newsstands. News racks are the ones that are smaller, not like with a person selling the news. Benches, info kiosks that are like these totems with information, APTs, litter and recycling receptacles, bike share services, wayfinding, car share services, bicycle parking units, urban panels, like just a panel with advertising, bollards, Wi-Fi, public art, and shade structures. So it was interesting to know that some of the RFPs, what they required that the private contractor does it. So if it required it, we colored them in green. Some other RFPs didn't require the contractor to do it, but suggested that the partner could propose them, and some didn't include it at all. So as we can see, bus stop shelters are the ones that are included everywhere. They're the most important, and they are like the basis of many of the contracts. There's another info kiosks are also very important. Urban panels are a big part of it. And the LA contract, that's the most recent one, they just awarded it a couple of months ago, was very interesting because it included some products that could be proposed by the partner, and just like gave the responsibility to propose innovative things. This is something interesting that might be interesting to include. So what are some of the main conclusions about the elements that could benefit New York City's program? So one of them is that capital expenditures can be done by the city, so that increases the revenue. We could include performance criteria for the private contractor to follow. We could include financial penalties and companies who fail to meet maintenance requirements. The procurement can be divided into lots, so we could divide the city into different areas, and companies could bid for as many areas as they wanted. They made some requests for expressions of interest for even innovative revenue sources, and we could do an RFI for anything else that we want to like get information from the private contractors who are the experts on developing this kind of program. Some others required that the furniture was built with recycled and sustainable materials. There were some cities that had one contract for each type of structure, so one contract for bus stop shelters, other for newsstands, other for bike racks, and some others. Some other things that we were thinking about this benchmarking is that we could include innovative structures. We've been reviewing waste containers, secure bike parking, among others. So how does the revenue scheme? So the revenue scheme was something that we discussed all year long because it is a topic that, because ads are very important, but sometimes are not the only resource that we could use. So what can we think? Right now, digital advertising is approved case by case. So we want, one of the proposals I'm making to the DOT and that we work with the team is to have that the industry shifts to digital ads away from static, and that the digital ads are like approved for the whole contract and not be approved case by case. The other proposal is the one that has been applied currently to the LA contract, and it's that the city makes a capital investment to fund originally the building and construction. So how would it work? We could have federal government or any other grants that New York City will manage. They will hire sign the franchise contract with the private contractor that would be in charge of all these activities. New York City DOT will fund the building and construction, And these all activities will generate some advertising. So normally, as we can see in the bar above, it would be the advertising revenue would be divided 50-50. I'm just making up these percentages. But if the DOT makes the capital investment, then the DOT will get a little bit more percentage of the advertising revenue that is generated from the contract. Another of the ideas I would like to propose is have a key performance indicator-based contract in which the private contractor must comply with the KPIs to obtain a revenue percentage. So how would this work? We will have a contract basis in which the KPI, we assume that the contractor will comply with 100% of these key performance indicators. If that's the case, then the revenue distribution will be 50-50. Once again, I'm making up these percentages. But what if they don't comply with 100%, just 30 or 70, then the revenue distribution will change and the DOT will get more revenue than the private contractor. This can be considered as a financial penalty for the contractor. So this will have, it's also an incentive for them to comply with 100%. And we want them to be even better than they're required. So if they comply with 135%, for example, of the performance indicators, then the percentage of distribution will be 50-50. DOT should always obtain the guaranteed minimum. And then the DOT can create some financial incentive for the private contractor to get a bonus. The final proposal is the Internet of Things. So Internet of Things is how normal elements in our lives connect through the internet. So we've seen some like the fridge or the dishwasher connects to the internet. Now we're proposing that bus stop shelters connect to the internet. They could be the host for small cells. Small cells are the digital infrastructure that network providers need to provide a better coverage for mobile services. So how would this work? The New York City, through the private contractor, will install small cells in the bus stop shelters that would provide infrastructure to network providers. The network providers are willing to pay this because they can provide better network services at lower cost. They would then pay for this infrastructure to the private contractor. This money would be used, one, to operate the bus stop shelters and other structures, and also to pay to the New York City DOT for the ride of installing small cells in their structures. So this is another possibility that can be used. So these revenue schemes are very interesting to evaluate, and it can be very useful for DOT. Finally, this is, I know I'm a little bit short of time, but basically these are some of the things that DOT has to think going forward on structuring the new contract. The key elements are the programs, the revenue, furniture, the type of design, the agencies related to signing the contract, the contractor responsibilities, and the types of advertising. There's just three options for but like the main options for each of these elements are the type of decisions that they should be making. I'm not gonna go over each of them because I'm really short of time. I'm sorry, I get very excited with other parts of the presentation. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for your attention today. And if there's any question, I'm open to answering them.
Thank you so much. Great job, Christina. If anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat. We'll give it a minute. Okay, don't think we have any questions for now. I'll keep checking to see if we have any later. Thank you again, and we'll back to Camille. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Christina. Very good job. Our next presenter student is Julia Amaral. And Julia, she's Brazilian, and she's a PhD student now for transportation engineering in the Center for Infrastructure, Transportation, and the Environment at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute at RPR. Before joining the PhD program at APIA, she obtained her master's degree and bachelor degree from the University of Sao Paulo. The presentation of Julia for the September 11 focused on helping NYMTC to update the socio-economic and demographic forecasting and zone allocation process model for New York metropolitan region. She researched and evaluated new methods found in the literature and in practice on other MPOs. So the floor is to Julia to present her project.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see? Yes, right. Thanks again for the introduction. My name is Julia Amaral. I'm currently a PhD student at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I'm going to present the project that I've been working on the past year. It's titled Analysis of Socioeconomic and Demographics Methodologies and Forecasting Solutions. First of all, I would like to thank everybody that made this program happen. It was a really good opportunity as a student to be able to work with an MPO. And I would like to thank all of the people that participated in my frequent meetings and provided valuable input for this project, in special to my supervisor, Larissa Morozovskaya. The objectives of this project are to evaluate new methods to update NYMTC socioeconomic and demographic forecasts and recommend enhancements or alternatives to existing forecasting models. First, why are forecasts important? Well, they shape the interaction between transportation investment and development patterns. And most importantly, they provide information for policymakers so they can develop policies, plan infrastructure investment, and even support environmental policies such as air quality maintenance. The first step of my journey in this project was understanding the current models, and I would like to highlight that this is an extreme simplification of the forecasting models, and NYMTC is just like the main basic steps, just to give an overview. So first, population, employment, and households are forecast at county level for the entire MSA area. And later, these are disaggregated into smaller zones. This is called zonal allocation process. There are over 5,000 zones in the entire MSA, and the disaggregation is based on number of housing units, new developments, location of businesses, schools, universities, etc. This information at zone level is one of the inputs of the New York best practice model that does the transportation modeling for the entire region. The approach of my research was twofold. One was understanding the state of the art, and the other one, the state of practice. So for the state of the art, the questions that I wanted to address were, what are the most modern methods available? How do they compare with NYMTC's method? And for the state of practice, I wanted to answer, what are the MPOs doing? How is it different from what NYMTC is doing? And what can NYMTC learn from other peer MPOs? The research was based on reviewing academic journals, MPOs reports, and also with an email survey directly to other peer MPOs. And based on that, the evaluation of methods and recommendations were made. Starting with the literature review, two main groups of research were identified. One has focused on forecasting, and this forecasting can be used for any type of planning purposes. The other one is more focused on transportation modeling, and forecasting comes as one embedded step of transportation modeling. These are called integrated transportation land use models, and they leverage on the transportation land use cycle. Basically, it models individuals' choices depending on transportation access, land use patterns, and these choices vary from where are you going to live, where are you going to work, or if that's the case, then are you going to buy a car or not? So the forecasting of socioeconomics comes as one of the steps of the transportation modeling in general. On the other side of the literature, the focus on forecasting only methods, microsimulation and machine learning are the state-of-the-art methods. However, they are reported to not perform as well as more traditional methods at this point. Cohort components and variations are the most accurate, and they require way less implementation effort than the most modern methods. However, there is no single method that outperforms the others in every single application. Actually, the literature reports that combining methods, frameworks that combine two or more methods are actually more accurate than just using one single method. Moving to the research with peer MPOs, these MPOs were selected based on the size of the population, and they are ordered in that table from most populated to least populated, considering the baseline population. The idea here was to look at other MPOs that have size comparable to NYMTC to understand more what they are doing and what could NYMTC learn from them. This table summarizes the findings. We wanted to look at, for example, frequency of updates, and that means how often are the forecasts made. Most of the MPOs reported that they're done every 4 years, with just a few doing it less or more frequently than that. Another point of interest for NYMTC is if the other MPOs are using consultants for the development of their forecasts. Most of them are using consultants. There's a little bit of a difference in whether they use tools from consultants or if the consultants are actually part of the forecasting process. In the case of using tools and training from consultants, then the in-house staff can conduct updates on their own later. Another point of interest is whether the MPOs are adopting integrated transportation land use model. Only 4 of the MPOs reported using them. 2 of them actually just implemented them quite recently. So we think there could be a trend of more and more MPOs being interested in this type of forecasting models. Finally, we wanted to know how much staff is allocated for forecasting efforts alone. This number varied a lot, with South California having at some point 10 dedicated employees in these efforts, and Baltimore having none. In the case of Baltimore, the MPO does not produce the forecast on their own. They collect from smaller local agencies for the entire MSA. The key insights from this research with peer MPOs is that the most popular method is the cohort component models, which is also used by NYMTC. Integrated transportation land use models are definitely trending, and we see that more MPOs are getting interested in that. But most importantly, none of the MPOs use any result produced by a tool or a model as a final result. There is always a discussion process, and they incorporate inputs from local agencies into the final results. And finally, there is no all fits one approach. The MPOs choose their methods based on their needs and their resources. Based on the results from the research, I conducted a qualitative evaluation. 6 methods were identified for this evaluation, and they were graded from 1 to 5, 1 being most negative and 5 most positive into these 5 criteria: cost, workforce, data needs, flexibility, and accuracy of results. Starting with extrapolative methods, these are the most simple methods, and they're very easy to implement, so that's the main advantage. However, they are based on past trends only, and they fail to incorporate external factors. For example, we just had the COVID-19 pandemic that definitely had a tremendous impact in socioeconomic and demographics. Based on past trends only, you are not able to capture this type of effects, and that produced negative, not as accurate results, let's say. Cohort component models are very traditional, and they are definitely a good cost-benefit alternative. They do have limited consideration of external factors, but they allow frameworks that are more inclusive in that sense. Econometric models allow any type of incorporation of spatial and economic variables, external variables. The main issue is that these variables might not be available, and there's also a calibration process to define if these variables are even significant into the models or not. Microsimulation has the main advantage of a high level of detail of output. Imagine that in microsimulation, every single individual is modeled. So that comes with a cost on the other hand, because for large areas such as the New York City MSA, that would come with high computational requirements and also data requirements, because in order for the simulation to be real, there must be some, not real, but at least model some kind of like real condition. It requires a certain level of data of inputs. Machine learning are definitely the state of the art in the literature, and the main advantage is the data-oriented nature. However, they do require a high level of expertise to be implemented, and at this moment, the results are not so good compared to most traditional models. So definitely, this is a field with potential, but right now, they don't seem to be ready for practice. And finally, integrated transportation land use models. They have very good accuracy of results, and that's basically because it incorporates the land use transportation cycle, which is a great way to model individual behavior. The disadvantage is that these require specialized software that could be costly, and they also have high data requirements. The data available, the data input for this software might not even available at this moment. Finally, I want to move to my recommendations. First of all, I'd like to say that if there's one thing that this research showed is that NYMTC's forecasting methodology is robust and is definitely not outdated. However, there are a few things that NYMTC could do in the short term. First of all, I would say improve the readability of the models by migrating to a more friendly coding language, such as Python or R. This would make the maintenance of the models easier and the updates as well. Another possibility is to explore other land use data sources to enhance the zonal allocation process. That's the process of disaggregating the results from county level to zone level. NYMTC already uses several data sources for that, but there are a few that could be used and they're open source. And some examples are tax parcels and OpenStreetMap buildings. The last recommendation for the short term is that NYMTC could review the core component models that are currently in place and test if there's any variation of this model that would improve the accuracy of these results. There's no straightforward answer to this. It would be a trial and error effort. Lastly, I would like to say that NYMTC in the long term should continue researching for new trends and developments in forecasting methodologies. Most of the methods that were graded, that's poorly graded because of data requirements or cost of software now, could change that scenario very shortly. We're living in a time of rapid technological advancement, digitalization. The data needs that now are an issue could be not an issue in the medium term even. So it's something to keep an eye for. With that, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's fantastic and very informative. Again, any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll make sure Julia gets them. Just give it a minute. I don't think we have any questions at this time, but towards the end, if anybody does, please just put them in the chat. I see you're getting lots of applause here. And we'll bring it back to Camille. Thank you so much, Julia.
Okay. Our final presentation today, not the least, is going to be done by Mr. Tao Liang. And Tao is currently pursuing a Master of Transportation Planning and Engineering degree at NYU. Before starting graduate school, Tao worked as an architect in China for 3 years. And his research interest is in urban data analysis, using data-augmented approaches to identify city problems and optimize design solutions. And Tao worked for his September 11 project with New York City Department of Transportation. And most of his work, he did work on the project is entitled Infrastructure is Public Space, Building Healthy, Resilient, and Sustainable Corridors. In this, I'm going to give the floor to Tao. Tao?
Thank you, Professor. Okay, let me share my screen. Could you see my screen?
Yes, but if you can make it full size, there you go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, my topic is Healthy Corridor Index, tool for building healthy corridors. So let me introduce myself briefly. I'm pursuing a master's degree at NYU before I was an architect in China. In this program, I have an opportunity to work at New York City DOT Urban Design Department. I'm responsible for formulating the Healthy Corridor Index, a tool that helps our department select prioritized corridors. I will introduce the background of this project, and then it's the methodology how we build the index. Finally, I will show some features and functions of the index website application. So in New York City, DOT Urban Design Department focuses mainly on redesigning the airspace recently. So what is the airspace? Airspace is the space beneath or adjacent to alleyway transportation infrastructure. These alleyway infrastructures are big dividers, block the connection between communities and create dark, unpleasant spaces. However, by designing the airspace properly, we could reconnect these neighborhoods. DOT Urban Design launched the airspace planning framework 4 years ago. They have installed several pilot projects at airspace in the Rockaway, Sunset Park, and Long Island City, transforming the airspace environment through lighting, green infrastructure, and other treatments for enhanced comfort, attractiveness, and healthiness. So, I mean, here is the definition of a healthy corridor. Of course, we want all corridors to be healthy corridors, and we already have a lot of toolkits about how we could make the streets better, like the street design manual. However, the biggest challenge is that we only have limited funding. In order to spend money where it is most needed, we need to identify the most vulnerable communities and prioritize the corridors that serve these communities. So NYC DOT Urban Design decided to develop a tool to quantify the condition of the neighborhoods alongside the corridor. So how could we quantify the neighborhood's conditions? What indicators we could select to build our index? We know health is shaped dramatically by community characteristics like education, economy, and other social factors. This is the CDC's social determinants of health framework, which identifies these broad factors beyond healthcare that impact health. So based on the CDC's framework we mentioned above, and through reviewing relevant literature and meeting with stakeholders, we identified the criteria for selecting the indicators and the methodology for building the index. First, we select indicators at census tract level. Our first version, Healthy Corridor Index, used the data at the MTA level. It can capture the neighborhood conditions nearby the street. In this version, we use data at census tract level. We are able to review the variation of different street segments. This is crucial because when we only have a limited budget, we can identify and prioritize the segment that has the greatest needs, rather than just prioritizing the entire corridor. And the second, we know index development always subjective. The most of question is, what is your criteria? Our index is specifically about what they did with an important health outcomes. So each indicator, as well as the index itself, is linked to citizens' physical health and mental health data. So the final index is comprised of 15 indicators that represent neighborhoods' conditions at the census tract level. And we group it into 5 domains, and they are all tied to social determinants of health, as we demonstrated earlier. So you will see, for example, that social and education domain are more heavily weighted in this index. And that's because they are more closely correlated with physical health and mental health. And so they count more when determining the score for location. So when I discussed our validation with health status on the previous slide, the key takeaway is that every indicator is linked to health status. So this means that by improving any indicator in this index through urban planning programs or community projects, we could expect to see improvements in residents' physical health and mental health conditions. Here is the Healthy Corridor Index census tract mapping. The index includes composite score for each census tract in New York City. The higher the score, the healthier the community condition is based on 15 indicators. The scores are then converted to a percentile to compare them to other tracts in the city. For example, a census tract below the 20th percentile would be identified as a very unhealthy community. Our index will reflect the geospatial distribution of different diseases. The red dashed line here is the average disease rate in New York City. We can see the average disease rates in healthy neighborhoods are below the red line, and that in unhealthy neighborhoods are above the red line, no matter asthma disease rate or obesity disease rate. So I know that many other index tools just use equal weighting or subjective weighting methods. Our previous version of the Healthy Corridor Index also used the equal weighting method, but this approach would overestimate the impact of some indicators. For instance, while green space, open space is important, income level will be more crucial when determining how healthy a neighborhood is. I used 2 different ways to construct the index and compare the relative performance. The left one is linked with the health data, and the right one weighted all the indicators equally. From the regression result, we can see the index that is linked with health data explain more variance of the obesity rate than the equal one. So this shows our method can improve the performance of our index model. And finally, I remap the index from census tract level to corridor level because for our agency, the target is the corridor. We would like to use street design treatments to make the surrounding communities better. I've made an interactive website. I would like to show you some functions it has. You can see this map shows all the streets in New York, and the color identify each street's Healthy Corridor Index classes. Red line is below 20 percentile comparing other streets, identified as a very unhealthy corridor. In the contrast, the street with index score above 80%, we identify it has a very healthy corridor. We could also zoom in and clear a sample street, for example, Rockaway. This program image shows the street name, segment information, it is an L space or not, and the population living nearby. This street has an corridor index score of 37. And score of 37 means that this corridor has healthier conditions than just 37% of other corridors in New York. And individual indicators are expressed as a percentile ranking as well. For example, here we can see that transportation and neighborhood rank below the 20 percentile, these domain scores can guide us to the specific policy action or urban design treatments that we could focus on for change. There are other functions. We can show different sub-index heat map using this drop-down. And we could only show L space, L corridor. It's useful for our agency, only look at the L space. As we can see, almost like 60% of the L corridor are relatively unhealthy. So this too could also help our department convince policymakers to invest more money in improving the L space. There are many layer options we could overlay with health corridor index. For example, Vision 0. Many areas are overlaid with unhealthy corridor, except in Manhattan, because we not only look at the traffic crashes, we also took into account the long-term health condition and equity issues. So, I mean, right now the website is hosted on GitHub. I will put the link on the chat box later. Please feel free to check it out if you are interested. So basically, it's my introduction of the Health Corridor Index and its interactive map today. So finally, I want to thank the committee gave me this opportunity. I've learned a lot from this program. Thanks to my supervisors, Neil and Nick. They are really patient and gave me a lot of useful advice. And my school advisor, Professor Precious, she always encouraged me and even helped me practice my English. And Stephanie, Mara, and Mr. Allen took their time to help me in modifying my presentation. At the end, let us remember See Wong, Charles, and Ignatius. Thank you.
So much, Tao. If anyone has questions, again, we'll give it a minute. You can put them into the chat. I see you're also getting hand claps and hand raises, so I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment, but if anyone has all further comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat before the meeting ends today. Thank you again, Tao. That was fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Oh, this is Deb Nelson. It is my pleasure to thank all of you, for your insightful and interesting presentations. NYMTC is really proud to have sponsored this program for so many years and to continue this program. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of reviewing applications for the 2022-2023 academic year. We're going to be awarding 4 more fellowships to talented students to undertake projects such as this, like you just saw, with tangible outcomes. And as you can see, the projects are quite diverse, just like our agencies are diverse. And so this coming up year, we're going to have quite a range as well. And we have other member agencies that have provided proposals. So we're excited to see our next pool of scholars and research projects. These scholars that we just heard today, as well as our past scholars, really are our future leaders, our future leaders in transportation, and we and our member agencies are very proud to have learned from them, as well as to have the privilege to mentor them through this important program. So I'd like to extend my congratulations to Fabian, Christina, Julia, and Tao. Thanks for all the good work that you've done. And in our living tribute to Charles, Ignatius, and See Wong, we wish you well in your future endeavors. And again, we thank you. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us here today. We really appreciate your interest and your support, and we look forward to sharing other outcomes and see you next year, and hopefully before then at other brown bags. Thank you again to everyone. Have a great day.